Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you're doing well and stuff, and welcome to my first video of 2022. In this video I wanted to go kind of back to my roots in a way and make something a little bit more simple than what I would normally do on the channel. Because, as you know, I tend to overcomplicate things a lot when I do my lures, and this is definitely not very complicated at all, and I think this is going to be a very entry-level friendly type of build. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it, and I'm going to be showing you how to make this cool looking old school crankbait. I'm going to start by tracing the outlines of my lure into this piece of red cedar, which I had a whole bunch of these small little cutouts just lying around and just really not doing anything. And I was actually going to throw these to the garbage, but then I figured, you know what, I might as well make something out of these. So now that the outlines are done, I'm just going to use this pokey tool to poke and mark out where I need to drill the holes for the eye sockets that I will be doing later on. I've noticed that a lot of these old school crankbaits don't actually have like molded eyes. They usually painted, so I just want to kind of modernize this a little bit and actually add some proper looking 3D eyes into this crankbait, which I think will look really awesome. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know what's gonna come next, and that is we're gonna head out to the bandsaw and I'm just going to cut the profiles out. I'm gonna be finishing off the profile with my disc sander, and I did also use my belt sander here on some parts too, but I forgot to film that. Whoopsie. At this point of the build, I decided, you know what, it's the perfect time to drill the eye socket pilot holes. And I'm just gonna go all the way through the blank with my drill press, and that way I get very nice and symmetrical pilot holes. So before I can do any kind of shaping or making the wire slot, I need to determine where the center line is. So I'm just going to draw it on right now. Okay, so now that the lure is still kind of a blocky state, or in a blocky state, I'm just going to use my hacksaw to cut the wire slot. And this is a very old school way of doing this, and obviously there are more mechanical ways that I could have gone about this. Make some sort of jig to my Dremel tool, for example, and use that to cut the wire slot, but I was like, I can't be bothered with that, and I'm just gonna do it by hand. And besides, the only thing that you really need is a good tight grip and a lot of determination. Take it from me, apparently I am the OG master baiter. At least if you believe Mr. Mulling Baits. Thanks for the shout out, Nate. Appreciate it. Next I'm going to move on to the table saw and cut a whole bunch of these small little strips of cedar that I will then place into the wire slots. While I was cutting those cedar strips for the wire slot, I also decided to cut some 2mm thick pieces for the lip slot, and this lure is going to have something called a hidden lip slot. And I'm not really sure if this is a traditional way of going about this. I've actually never seen anyone make this before, so I don't really have any point of reference, but I think this is probably the easiest way to go about it. Once the super glue has dried enough, I'm just going to basically cut out the excess wood with a hobby knife. And there you have it, a hidden lip slot. Pretty neat, eh? Now I'm gonna start profiling the lure, and I already made this template that I'm gonna be using to draw out the outlines that I want to cut out and the shape that I want to have for this particular crankbait. And as you can see, this is fairly skinny, so there's not really that much wood to take out. Since I'm working with fairly soft wood and there's actually not that much removal that I have to do, I decided to skip the bandsaw altogether and just go with my disc sander to get the rough shape out. And then of course later on I did use the belt sander option as well to make sure that everything is nice and curvy and smooth. Keeping up with the traditional theme of the build, I'm just going to use my hobby knife to cut out the excess wood while rounding this off. And later on I'm just going to use sanding paper to round everything nice and smooth. Okay, so this next step is probably the most frustrating pieces of lure making that there is, especially for a beginner when you're starting out. Sometimes it's really difficult to get all the loops looking nice and crisp and round and, you know, have them proportionately correct. But, you know, I have to say, even for a seasoned veteran like me, this is still pretty difficult. If you don't use a jig, that is. And I tend to always do these individually. So, I mean, if you use a jig, you have to have everything in the lures proportionately correct in the first place, and mine just aren't. So I didn't feel like it was kind of justified to do this sort of stuff with a jig. So I'm just going to bend them by hand. And I'm just going to use round nose pliers and just normal pliers. And it's fairly easy to bend these because the wire that I'm using is 0.7 millimeters, which is fairly thin, so it's easy to get nice round loops. So what I just do is I bend a loop, fit it into the lure, bend another loop, fit it into the lure again to see if the proportions are correct, and then basically just repeat. And if you have small batch like I'm making right now, you will inevitably get better at this once you have a lot of repetition and you know where everything is supposed to be, if that makes sense. Alright, next I'm going to glue in the wire into the wire slot, and I'm just going to use a 5-minute epoxy to do it. And I usually start from the bottom, just put little bit of glue into the bottom just to make sure that the wire is encased in epoxy. And I think it goes without saying that you want to use too much epoxy than too little, because having some sort of voids inside the epoxy might cause you a catastrophic failure when you hook into that fish of a lifetime, and I personally don't want that to happen, so I just tend to go a little bit overboard with the epoxy. Once I'm sure that there's enough epoxy in the bottom, I'm just going to put in the through wire into the slot and basically just repeat what I just did and completely encase the wire with epoxy. And after that, I'm just going to cap it off with those pieces of cedar that you saw me cut a little bit earlier. I'm sure that there's some of you out there that are wondering why the heck do you even use those pieces of cedar in there in the first place. Well, the reason for that is quite simple. The cleanup process is going to be way more faster if you use something soft like strips of cedar. And also, since the strips of cedar are fairly superficial, they won't really affect the structural integrity of the glue in any way, shape, or form. I think this next clip will show you quite nicely why using these strips of cedar is preferable. Just using a hobby knife is so easy to just cut out the excess and then finish everything off with sanding paper. So I have half of the lures that I've been working on the drying wheel now, and I'm just going to encase them with True Coat epoxy next. Once the epoxy had cured, I decided to take the lures out for a test and see what the buoyancy would be like, if I needed to add any weight or anything that was weird going on with the lures. And to my dismay, I noticed that they laid completely flat on their side with all the hardware attached. So obviously I need to add some weight. So I decided to drill a hole and put 3 grams of lead inside the body cavity and seal that with Bondo. After all that, I coated the lures with True Coat epoxy once again, and next we're off to do some painting. For the painting portion of this video, I decided to go with a classic color that I know as Ambulance, and I think it was Rapala that first came out with this color back in the day, which is basically orange and yellow. Very simple and effective too. But I'm gonna do sort of like a modern twist out of that particular color and kind of jazz it up a little bit. So I'm gonna start with a white base, and white because the colors that I'm going to be painting on here are gonna be fluorescent and they need to pop. So having a white base really helps with that a lot. And I also decided to keep half of the lure bare wood and half of it painted, because I really enjoy that look personally. So I have a lot of different shades of yellow in my arsenal, and I decided to use this one in particular because it's kind of like in between fluorescent and like opaque yellow, and it's still bright enough to make colors that I'm going to be putting next really stand out. The original Rapala color that I was talking about earlier has a foil base, and I wanted to kind of emulate that with netting and paint. So I'm just going to use this Createx gold chrome, which I love and hate at the same time, because the consistency of it's really watery. So you have to paint many layers to get the full effect of this paint. But when you do, there's nothing else that even comes close to the brightness that it has. Next I'm going to start doing the head details, but I need to have some sort of background color to have contrast between the gold that I'm going to be painting the details on. So I'm just going to use this Wicked Black from Createx. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I always start from the mouth first when I do the details. But with this one, it's particularly tricky because the shape of the head is not really good for this kind of a traditional stencil that I usually do. So I'm just going to use that to spray where I need to cut on this masking tape that I'm going to be using as my stencil. Here's a nice example of me being a little rusty from YouTube because I forgot to turn on the camera when I was starting to paint the mount details. Anyway, these things happen, and I don't think you're gonna lose that much precious information by not seeing that. So usually at this point I would add the other head details next. However, this time around I decided to do things a little differently, and I'm going to add a lateral line to the lure. And I'm just going to use this candy black to do it. And if you want to do something like this, probably you would want to have airbrush that has a needle that is around maybe 0.2 or 0.18 millimeters. Now, I think I could have just left the lateral line black and I probably would have been okay with that, but being me, I always want to add more things, even though I'm trying to keep things simple. It's a terrible habit that I have, but you know what? I thought that adding some purple-violet color shift paint on the lateral line might look actually pretty cool, so I decided to do exactly just that. For the belly, I decided to use this pearlescent yellow color, but in order for me to make that really pop, I need to prime the surface with this white paint once again. And next we're going to add that lemon yellow color that I was talking about a little while ago. And this one has slight pearlescent qualities to it. It has some metal flakes in it, which I think looks really awesome. I'm going to switch back to that gold chrome paint that I was using earlier to the mouth details. And we're going to finish off the head now. Alrighty, now that we're done with the head details, I'm going to move on to the back, and I need to prime it with white again to make sure that the orange that I have planned for this particular lure is going to pop really nicely. And now I'm just going to add that fluorescent orange that I was talking about a little while ago that I wanted to incorporate in this paint job. And honestly, I haven't had too many opportunities to use this particular color because most of my paint jobs tend to lean on the more natural side of things. But you know, it's fun to try different things out once in a while and paint something crazy. Alrighty, we're almost done with the paint job, and there's just one more thing that I need to add. That is the fins. And honestly, at this point, I don't think I can make a lure without fins anymore. It just feels wrong to not have them. So I'm just gonna go ahead and paint them. But you know, this is actually a really good exercise to learn how to control the amount of paint and how much paint you actually spray out from your airbrush while doing fins as small as these ones. And I hope it translates in the video that I'm actually spraying very thin layers while I do the fin rays. And this is to give them a little bit more of a natural hue and not really make them look super opaque, which I don't think looks very good. Before putting the final coat of epoxy on these lures, I'm just going to mix up some 5-minute epoxy and I'm just going to glue in the eyes. In order to protect that awesome paint job that I just did, I'm just going to add a couple of layers of True Coat epoxy onto these lures. While I'm waiting for the epoxy to cure, I'm just going to go ahead and make the lips for these lures that I've been working on. And I'm going to be using 2mm thick Lexan polycarbonate sheet to make those lips. This Lexan polycarbonate sheet is very smooth and shiny, so I figured it would be a good idea to scuff up some of the part that goes inside the lures to make sure that the glue will adhere to the Lexan polycarbonate sheet properly. I've fitted the lips to all the lures that I've been working on here, and now it's just a matter of gluing them in with 5-minute epoxy. Before going ahead and doing the swim test, I just wanted to show you guys all the lures that I've made and just kind of showcase them to you individually and, you know, get a kind of a better look at them because honestly, these look pretty neat, I think. Okay, so now that you guys seen all the lures that I've made, it's time to do the traditional swim test. And as you can see, this particular lure doesn't really have much of an action, but all is not lost. And this actually gives me a really great opportunity to teach you guys how to properly tune your crankbaits and get more of a kick out of them. So what you simply do to fix this problem is to take your round nose pliers and you bend the line tie towards the lip. And this will give the lure much more of a wider wobble. And as you can see, the lure has much more wider wobble now, and it actually looks pretty good. Pretty fishy, if I say so myself. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like the video if you did, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and also you can support me on Patreon nowadays too, if you want. What you get with that is basically you get dips to my new videos that I will be posting in there one day prior to what they would go live on the channel. And yeah, I'm gonna be putting some extra content in there once in a while too. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys in the next one.